All right. Well, this morning, I want to start a new series, and I don't know. Sometimes with series, how I look at it, it could be. I never know how long there could be. It could be one sermon. That's my series, and I'm done, and I'm doing something else. But anyway, I want to start a series that's called the Oak Grove Country Club. Okay? now, before you get mad or throw things at me here, hear me out. The Oak Grove Country Club. How many of us has heard somebody over the years say, well, church is nothing but a country club, and all they do is they take care of their own and all, How many times have we heard that? Well, I got to thinking about that, and I want to look at some of those things that the church looks like a country club, and things that the church shouldn't look like a country club. And I'm not saying there's not things that we can't learn from the country club. One thing, we could buy a golf course. That would be cool. But I want to read a little story here this morning from a pastor who, and when I say country club, I'm not talking about Sycamore Hills, okay? I'm talking about a full-service private country club, all right, that does it up. And I want to read briefly here a little story about a pastor who visited one of these kind of country clubs. And he says, we did not go park the SUV because we pulled up to the clubhouse and stepped out of the vehicle. There to meet us was two attendants who quickly went around the back, unloaded our golf clubs. As they pulled the golf bag out of the SUV, they placed the clubs on the back of the cart and began cleaning the clubs up to a nice shine. Then one of the attendants jumped in the SUV and drove off. As we were waiting for our clubs to be cleaned, a nice young lady asked what kind of refreshments we would enjoy. I selected an orange Gatorade. In a matter of moments, the bottle was placed in the cup holder of the cart. We drove over to the driving range and hit an unlimited amount of practice balls on the range. We then hit the links on a perfectly tended course. The round flowed smoothly without any long waits or inconveniences. After a respectable 92, with a few extra shots allowed, I was playing with gentlemen. We finished the round on a nice sunny day. We went into the clubhouse where an attendant met us who cleaned our golf shoes and nicely passed them back to us. We waited for the attendant to pull out the SUV. As the kind attendant placed our clubs back in the back of the vehicle, the executive friend handed over a tip and we went off. This was a great country club experience. It was totally all about me. It was about my happy, my comfort, my preferences, my desires. The country club is there to service my needs, wants, and ideas. Unfortunately, this attitude is how some think about the church. I want to be nicely greeted. I want a nice sermon. I want good parking, some good classes for my children, and some positive singing. We sometimes think of the church through our own eyes. We think of the church in ways that should please us. We want to turn the church into a well-run country club. Now, I'm not saying that there's things that we can't learn from the country club. About service and about treating people good and making people comfortable. There's a lot of things I think we could learn about the country club, but basically there's two ways that you can operate and grow a church. And one of them is, unfortunately, I think has become the most popular today, is the country club, or what I would call the attractional church, where everything has to be attractive, looks nice. It's like I said, it's all about the person who walks in there. And if you have this great experience, you're coming back because, man, they made you feel special. And we live in such a consumer society that this is what we want. We want to be tended to. And unfortunately, that's what has become popular today. Now, the other side of that is what I would call the missional church. And the missional church grows by means of reaching out and touching people through the power of Jesus Christ, showing them the love of Jesus Christ, and then they want to attend church with you because they want what you got. And then they want to learn how to share it with others. And that's the missional church. Now, what I really want to talk about for the next few weeks is the difference. The difference between the attractional church, which we could call the country club church, and the missional church. And what are some things that really make the difference? And like I said, there's things that we can learn from both. And actually, in our country today, we have we have some churches that are just taken off. Just explosion, just growing like crazy. And I really think it's the churches who understand how to do both. How to do both. And hopefully maybe we can understand how to do both. But anyway, we're going to talk about some of these things. One of the things that I have an opportunity to do as a pastor is funerals. And whenever I do a funeral or having done funerals, it has taught me more about life than death, actually. Because it's that time whenever, what's a pastor to do during a funeral? You talk about that person's, you don't talk about their death. You talk about that person's life. And what happens? You meet with the family. You try to get special moments. You try to get a good description of that person and that person's life. And then usually you have maybe 2 days to fit somewhere in your schedule to come up with a funeral service that lasts, maybe 30 minutes, including, 2 or 3 songs and this kind of thing. And generally what we do at funerals is we speak very inadequately about a person's life. And when I say inadequately, it's because we leave so much out. We leave so much out. When you think about it, even if somebody's life has been cut short, you're still leaving so much out. You're just hitting the very basics. And a question that I want to ask this morning is this. What if your life could speak? What would it say? And that's our first question this morning is, what if your life could speak? What would it say? Now, if it was an honest description of you, what you're doing, who you are, not our good intentions. Boy, we are filled with good intentions, aren't we? Not those, but you yourself right now, if your life could speak, what would it say? Not some delusional existence that we try to convince ourselves sometimes is the truth, but the truth. What would it say? Well, one of the things that is mentioned in obituaries is your vocation, the vocation of the person. And however, this morning I want to look at this word vocation a little different than what we probably look at it. I think it's misused quite commonly. Usually we think about this word vocation as your career, as whatever you did to pay the bills. This is what we look at as our vocation. But I think it's typical for us to look at a vocation as something that we choose. This is something that I've chose. This vocation is something that I chose, so I go to college, I take some kind of training. This is what I'm doing because this is the vocation that I chose. Well, I went to, we'd say I went to Webster's Dictionary. Today I say I went to dictionary.com and looked up the word vocation. And it gave me 4 definitions in this word. And 3 of the definitions use the word calling. A vocation is a calling. And 2 out of those 4 called it a divine calling, a calling from God. So, if we took this word vocation and used its true meaning, and then we asked that question, what is your vocation? What would you say? What is your vocation? See, a vocation is not something that we choose, but it's something that has been chosen for us by our Creator. Okay? That's number 2. Now all of a sudden it looks a little different, doesn't it? Romans 8, 12 through 17. Therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the Spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. It is so amazing. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs of Christ. If indeed we suffer with Him, that we may also be glorified together. That is so powerful. If you remember last week, if you remember 2 weeks ago, when we talked about those who put their faith in Jesus Christ no longer are led by the flesh, but we are led by the Spirit. So how do we apply free from flesh and live in the Spirit to our lives? What does it mean to be led by the Spirit? We'll never understand our vocation until we understand what it means to be led by the Spirit. How many examples can we look in the Bible and see those who were led by the Spirit to do a diversity of things, all kinds of things they were led by the Spirit to do? Well, this passage that I just read tells us that we're part of that same story. It's not just those guys in the Bible that was led by the Spirit to do things, but it's us as well. What are we led by the Spirit to do? And it's hard for us sometimes in this society that we live in to look at what success looks like. What is real success? But when we think about what we just read, this amazing passage in Romans 8, what could be even compared to being an adopted child of God? Is there anything that compared to being an adopted child of God, a joint heir with who? Jesus Christ? A joint heir with Jesus Christ? Are you kidding me? I know me. I can't be that. But the Word tells us that we are. There's no greater success than that. No greater honor than that. And to have a relationship with God that He is not only our Heavenly Father, but we can refer to Him with such intensity and such emotions that we call Him Daddy. We call Him Daddy. That's what this passage tells us. How amazing is that? So how do we know then? How do we know then what our Daddy, what our Heavenly Father has chosen for us as a vocation? How do we know what it is? Finding out what God has placed in us to use to glorify Him and to glorify the kingdom. Now, one thing that we could do is this, and it's very commonly done. We could go like to 1 Corinthians and where we talk about all the gifts and we could do a gifts assessment. And we do that all the time. And there's nothing wrong with doing a gifts assessment. And then we do this gifts assessment, and then from that gifts assessment, we say, okay, you have this gift, this gift, this gift, this gift. So therefore, you are, you should fit into this ministry and this ministry and this ministry. And I guess that's okay, but I want to approach it from a little different angle, because knowing our gifts and talents doesn't reveal the desire that God has placed in our hearts. Because you see, we could have, and that is number 3, we could have these gifts and talents, but they could fit in different vocations. So just knowing what your gifts and talents are doesn't tell us what God has placed in our heart for us to do. Okay? Our vocation is revealed when the desire that God has placed in our hearts meets the needs of the world. Think about that a minute. And that's number 4. Our vocation is revealed when the desire that God has placed in us meets the needs of the world. Is that happening? I mean, we really need to look at number 4 and say, is that, when we think about our vocation, is that happening? Is that happening in your life today? Martin Luther, tell you this. I think it was Martin Luther that said this, that before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. Psalms 37:4. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and He shall give you the desires of your heart. And I do not think that this scripture means if I'm happy to be a Christian, God's going to give me everything I want. That's the country club way of thinking about it. That's the way of country club way of looking at this verse. As long as I'm happy to be a Christian, God's going to give me everything that I want. That's the consumer perspective of it. I believe that delight here is used in a way that we've been talking about, that higher standard that the Christian lives, called grace. When we live in God's grace, the desires of the flesh no longer control us. But it is God's will that becomes our desire. The closer that we become to God, the desire is God's will. And God will definitely give us His will. He will definitely work through us. Whenever we enter into that obedient relationship with Him, our desire will become what? It'll become our vocation. It's what He calls us to do. Now, unfortunately, in this old life, there are a lot of things that hinder us from fulfilling God's vocation. And I want to look at some of these things, and that's one of the directions I want to go as we go through this series, is what are some of the things that hinder us from following the vocation that God has chosen for us. And one of those things is responsibilities. You know, responsibilities, it's kind of funny when we think about this. The Bible certainly teaches us to be responsible. We are to work and we are to take care of our families and be a supportive member of our community and not a detriment. And we are supposed to do these things. Yes, we are. But however, sometimes, you know, following that career and buying that house and paying for those cars and raising those kids and doing those responsible things that we're supposed to do can also get in the way of actually fulfilling God's vocation for our life. And we have to draw that line or make that balance somewhere. Now, the point that we really have trouble sometimes understanding, and I want to go back to that quote, is that I must listen to my life telling me who I am. I must listen to my life telling me who I am. Do you do that? Sometimes we listen to others telling us who we are, don't we? Sometimes we have to fit somebody else's mold. Do you really take the time and pray about it and say, Lord, who really am I? You may be a very successful person, but who are you really? What has God really called you to do? Now, I've given everybody, or most of you, a handout that just has some examples. This is just a very small list. When you think about all the vocations that God can place on somebody's heart. This is just a very small list. But sometimes things like this spark our thought process whenever we look at them. Do you ever stop and pray? And I don't care how old you are, by the way. I don't care if you're a teenager. I don't care if you're younger than that. Or I don't care if you're the oldest person here. Do you really know what God's vocation is for you? Have you really, really thought about it? Have you ever seen an obituary that says, this was their career and this was their calling from God? Do we ever see that? This was their career and this was their vocation. Maybe we should. Shouldn't we? Maybe we should. I'm not saying that you have to change your career to follow God's vocation for your life. Sometimes you may have to. Sometimes you may have to. But sometimes God may have placed you in that career so that you can influence people that nobody else can. What is God's vocation for your life? And as you just take those lists and look them over. And guys, you can come up. In searching for your vocation, I want to ask you a couple of questions. What really excites you? What really excites you? What really gets you going when you think about this? And then also, what gets you angry? What is it? What is it that gets you stirred up? What is it that discourages you? What is it that the injustice that really bothers you in this world? And believe me, there are lots of injustices in this world. What is it that really gets you going? What is it that stirs your passion? Are you passionate about things that then you think, man, I wish that someday I could do something about that, or I wish that somebody could do something about that? Well, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time. It's just like this tournament that we had. You never know what God's going to do in your life until you start doing something. If you sit still and do nothing, there ain't anything going to happen. It's time to get up and go. And stop thinking about it. Stop putting it off. What has God called you to do? If you are a child of God, God has placed something in your heart. He has placed your vocation in your heart. What is it? Mother Teresa, and I think we all know who Mother Teresa is. She's this wonderful lady who worked in Calcutta, India all her life. She dedicated her life to helping out the poor and the needy in Calcutta. And she was interviewed one time and they said, how can we know what God's calling is for our life? And she said, find your own Calcutta. And when you think about that, that's a quick answer. But when you think about find your own Calcutta, and when you think about who said it, Mother Teresa gave everything that she had her whole life to Calcutta. What's ours? What's our Calcutta? You see, what does this have to do with the Country Club Church? Those who live in the Country Club Church or prefer the Country Club Church, they want to be served. And those who prefer the missional church are either working in or seeking the vocation that God has placed in their heart. Now, since I told you that, and let's think about this a minute. What did I put up here on the screen? The Oak Grove Country Club. Is it? Or isn't it? Is it wrong? Which do you prefer to live in? The Oak Grove Country Club or the Oak Grove Missional Church? Because you see, when we live in the missional church, and all of us want to say, oh, we're not the country club. No, we're not that. We're not superficial. We're not that at all. That's not us. But then when you think about the missional church, it means we've got to get busy. It means we've got to get with it. It means that we've got to suffer a little bit. It means we've got to get on our knees and pray. It means we've got to have things change a little bit. It means our life has got to be upset. So which church do we want to live in? Do we want to live in the country club church, or do we want to live in the missional church? And you see, you don't have to answer that question, because the question has already been answered by the life that we live. So this morning, I just want to leave you at that. And I want to challenge you with that question this morning. What's my vocation? What's my vocation? Some of you may know exactly what your vocation is, but you refuse to act upon it. And we're going to talk about that a little more as we go along. What is your vocation this morning? These guys are going to play, and you're always welcome.